Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Travel Tales, Part 1. East German Border Guard Interrogation, 1983. This was my first run-in with my first visit to Behind the Iron Curtain. This was the evil empire days of the early Reagan administration, pre-Gorbachev in the Soviet Union. 1983. Cold War was still really cold. And I was studying in Germany, thanks to a scholarship from the Deutsche Akademische Austauschdienst. The Deutsche Akademische Austauschdienst is the German academic exchange service. The West German government this is the West Germans and the East Germans competing around the world for who could be the most friendly German after the Second World War. One side on the Soviet side, East Germany, the other on the NATO side, West Germany. And I was given a stipendium to study at a language school at Goethe Institute in Rothenburg ob der Tauber, the beautiful walled city on the romantic road in what is today Bavaria. And learned a lot of German, stayed with a German family, and then following that summer program, I stayed with my German brother and his family home in Handschuhsheim outside of Heidelberg, and used that as my base to backpack around Europe. And I traveled with people I met. I had my third year roommate from University of Virginia, one of my best friends still, whose ancestry is German, and he was visiting friends in Germany. He came to visit me in Rothenburg while I was studying, and then we planned to meet up at another friend of mine, who was another roommate of mine at UVA, fourth year. His name is Michael Meyer, lived in Braunschweig, and Mark knew him from UVA, and we decided to meet at Michael's and then hitchhike together into West Berlin from West Germany, which was the Cold War, the wall divided East Germany and West Germany, but then there was the enclave of Berlin, which was also divided initially into four sectors of the four victorious powers: the Soviet Union, United States, Great Britain, and France. Great Britain, France, and the United States became West Berlin. East Berlin was the Russian sector, and then in 1961 they began building a wall dividing it, and then that was really when they cut off East Berliners from West Berliners. Berliners, right. So if you've seen the movie Bridge of Spies, Tom Hanks, great movie, he exchanges a spy on a bridge at the end, but he has to go over, he actually goes over into East Berlin by subway. So in those days, there were two places to cross from West Berlin to East Berlin and back. One was Checkpoint Charlie. That was a street crossing. I never used that. I went to it, and I've been to it since the wall came down. But my idea was, and this was after we'd hitched in together, Mark and we'd run into I met a guy backpacking, and we ended up having him hook us up with a place to stay after the first four people I called that I knew better weren't there. But this is how backpacking worked. I mean, I called friends and called up any contacts. Oh, could I crash on your couch? Or that was better than, less expensive than a hostel. Anyway, I met this guy Holgar. He set us up, and we met some really cool people that we thought, they treated us nicely, but, they were up to some no good. And when we came back, I'd heard, one of them had been arrested, and Holgar was on the lam. But that's a story that is not going to take us back to what I'm talking about here. Mark left, and so I'm still staying there for another few days, and I want to go see East Germany, and it was easy. With an American passport, you go over there, you have to change like 40 marks to 40 East German marks, which you couldn't spend because they're not paying their people much and they're subsidizing it. So and you couldn't bring it back and exchange it either. So that was an interesting day. But the day went off on a tangent as soon as I got there. So here's what happens. The subway, this was the subway in Berlin was connected and running prior to the Second World War. I mean, they started building it before the First World War and then really did a lot of work in the 20s. And then it was running. It was very mechanized and very advanced for its day. They used it as bomb shelters, of course, during the war. They rebuilt it after the war and had it up and running again. But the problem was, they divided the city after they built the lines. And in order to run the lines from northern parts of the Western Zone to southern parts of the Western Zone that came through the center, they passed through the Eastern Zone. And they had these ghost platforms. It was one of the weirdest experiences because you're riding through the very commercialized West, and then you go through the East, and they get to these platforms of the subway that are no longer open to the East German people because it's forbidden for them to go across the wall. And they would just sort of slow down, and you'd see East German soldiers with guard dogs and automatic weapons on their shoulders, patrolling the platforms as these cars slowly went past until they stopped at the one place where you could get off, and that was Bahnhof Friedrichstrasse, and that's in the movie. So my day in Bahnhof Friedrichstrasse, you could get off at Bahnhof Friedrichstrasse, spend your Western hard currency buying very cheap alcohol and cigarettes that the East German government was buying wholesale, and then selling for profit, and thereby making more hard currency so that they could buy other things from the West, which they couldn't get in the East. And continue back to West Germany. You could go buy much cheaper booze or cigarettes and a few other chocolates and other sort of luxury goods from these shops in East Germany and not pay the taxes in the West. And you could use your hard currency, which they were wanting to accumulate. But I decided I wanted to go over there, and I wanted to see the Pergamon altar in the History Museum there. They have all these great antiquities that, European powers stole from around the world when they were empires. The Pergamon Gate, they have the Ishtar Gate, they have the Pergamon altar and the Ishtar Gate. Sorry, yes, Pergamon altar and the Ishtar Gate. So you have, Central Mideastern, and you have the Anatolian coast that they brought there, along with a lot of other friezes and statues that the Germans were able to smuggle through their archaeologists. They didn't really have colonies in the Middle East, but they sent archaeologists there, and that's what they did. We're taking it back to protect them, because you can't protect them. Yeah, right. If you get a chance, John Oliver did a huge expose on this a few years ago, and it's well worth watching, how the West has plundered stuff from places and won't return it. Actually, thievery. The English in some of their letters when they were off in Benin, for example, called it booty and loot in their own letters. They knew what they were doing. They told you what they were doing, and now they deny it and drag their feet. Anyway, John Oliver, great special on this sort of robbery. But anyway, my story, I'm just going over there to go to museums. They had also great art, history museums. I changed my money, I hand my passport, and I made the mistake of speaking fluent German to the East German border guard while handing him an American passport. I'd been speaking German the whole time I'd been there, much better than I'm speaking it today because I haven't studied it since. And no, should have played the dumb American. Should have gone, "How y'all doing? Having a good day?" Handed him my passport instead of speaking German to him. "Why do you speak such good German? Please come with me." And it was like right out of a movie set. This closet-sized room with a small desk, 2 chairs, naked light bulb in the ceiling. And this officer asked me a series of questions for about 3 minutes. "What are you doing here? Why do you speak such good German? What's your background? What are you doing here?" Blah, 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 blah. Gets up, pushes a chair, and closes the door. About 5 minutes later, another guy. Little more lettuce and cabbage on his shoulders, a little higher rank. Same questions. He gets up and leaves. A few minutes pass by. A third, even higher ranking, comes in, asks the same questions. I'm like, I'm just here to go to museums. So I was speaking with a State Department friend of mine, fellow guest speaker on cruise ships. He was in the State Department for years, and he said, I bet they were setting a tail up to follow you around. And he was right. As soon as he said that, I said, well, yeah, I know I was followed. And I was followed. Once I left, I walked around. I did go to see the Pergamon Museum and all the stuff there. I went to the history. I went to a bookstore and looked at the books they had. Of course, all it was, Soviet ideological, the good commie story, right? Yeah, right. What? Communism. I am a progressive. Communism, no. I mean, it's totalitarianism. You don't have a choice, especially that of the Lenin, Stalinist, Maoist ilk. But from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. That was the initial statement by Marx. Is just not practical without any kind of incentive outside of small communal groups. So don't call me a communist. I'm not. They hate me. I'm a free thinker. But that's unfortunately the often as far as the political discussions get here in the United States sometimes. You're right, you're left wing, you're a commie. No. So, I knew I was followed. Because there was no street traffic once you get within a block of the wall. So on the West German side of the wall, they're up painting on it, and anybody that had a piece of the wall that was knocked down, that had paint on it, it probably was somebody just picking up a flat piece of plaster and putting paint on it and selling it to you. However, I actually went back and picked a piece of a guard tower up in '96. And that, I know, it wasn't a piece of the wall, it was a piece of a guard tower. Because they were tearing it down at that time. It didn't have any paint on it, but I thought that, this is a real relic. Not something that some tourist threw some paint on a piece of plaster and sold it to a tourist. And that's another aside. So on the East German side of the border, that's where behind the wall, on the East German side, further to the east, were the gun towers and floodlights, and there's barbed wire. So you could not approach the wall, except you could get within a block of it at the Brandenburg Gate, which is Unter den Linden, the main thoroughfare. And you have this Victory Gate, the Brandenburg Gate, a Victory Arch Gate, that was in no man's land. You couldn't get to it from the West German side. You could get within a block of it on the East German side. And that's the main thoroughfare through the center of the city where prior to the Second World War, in Hitler's period, and in the empire, the Bismarck-Wilhelmine first unification of Germany, starting in 1871, that was where you had your main military parades through the United, it was the United City of Berlin. Now it's divided. And I was walking down Unter den Linden, and you get closer and closer to the gate, and there's no foot traffic, there's no car traffic, because you can't pass through that gate. So for the last block, you can walk to about a half block of the wall. So I was standing on a corner on the north side. Then I walked west that half block, crossed and continued sort of south, and walked east back that half block on the other side of the street. The whole time there was somebody who had been following me. Where's he going to go? Is he going to follow me? No, he's just stood on that corner and watched me walk a block up and a block back, or half block up and a half block back, and cross the street, and then continued to follow me. It wasn't like he could hide. So yeah, I knew I was tailed. And all I did was go to museums. I ended up buying a pamphlet of something about, I think there was a book about Wolf Biermann, who had been an had left the East and gone west, but they still had a book of his works, and I think that's what I bought. And you know, a singer-songwriter, a protest writer. Anyway, and then I had a meal. A very not as good of a meal as you could get in great restaurants in West Berlin, but you know, substantial German meals. I was a meat eater back in those days, so I think I had some pork gravy, potatoes, and sauerkraut. You know, this is the pork, potato, sauerkraut belt that stretches all the way across Northern Europe, and a beer that was okay. And I paid the bill, and I had, like, of the 40 marks I had to change, I've only spent 10. I had 30 marks left. That was the tip I gave to my waiter, because I couldn't take it back and change it. And I got out unscathed. And I was able to go back in other times, and I did in my next visit without having the same problem, because I learned my lesson. Speaking English to them when I handed my American passport, they won't necessarily wonder what I was doing there. So this is the first of 3 encounters I've had with communist state, police, border guards, immigration people. That was in 1983. The next time was in China, and I'll talk about that. And then the final time was in Vietnam, and I'll tell you that in a series that I'm going to call Travel Tales.